Welcome everyone. My name is Esther Rachel and I am a nutrition and wellness consultant and health coach with Well Nourished Life. And I am going to discuss with you today information in regards to sugar. And it's the presentation that we're going to talk about today is the case against sugar and why it is important to abstain and refrain from eating sugar. And in this presentation, you're going to learn a lot about the effects of sugar, what the reason behind not wanting to have sugar in your diet, and so much more. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Esther Rachel, and there I am. And so today we're going to learn where sugar hides, the names and aliases of sugar, sugar and weight gain and how it affects weight gain and weight loss, how sugar is related to cancer, how sugar affects the brain, and what it means to be addictive, and alternatives I will discuss with you to sugar, the options that you can use instead of actual sugar. So, before we get started, I want you to consider this thought that the information that you're about to learn will be eye-opening, and it's up to you to use this information to make a change in your life or not. So this is the words of Charles Darwin. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. So it's up to you to take this information and make a decision on if and when you are going to change parts of your diet that is affected by sugar. Okay? So, the sugar mystery. There's a lot of talk about sugar and is it okay in moderation? Or people say, you can eat sugar but just not too much, or you actually need sugar for energy, or even people will say that sugar is actually in fact addictive, or that artificial sweeteners are just as bad. So you don't really know with all this information what is actually accurate, because some people say sugar in moderation, some people say no sugar at all, some people say artificial sweeteners are worse, but you may not even know what is an artificial sweetener. So all of these common claims to do with sugar opposing one another, one thing is for certain: we are consuming more sugar in our diets than we have ever been before. There's more products on the market. There's more sugar in our Dunkin' Donuts coffee and our Starbucks coffee that we're putting in. So we are a nation of sugar consumers. So I wanted to give you a really big number here, 150 to 170 pounds, according to the USDA, is what the average American consumes in refined sugars a year. Now, in the past, in the 1800s, it was 4 to 6 pounds yearly. And even in going back up to the early 1900s, it was 90 pounds a year. But we've racked up to 150 to 175 pounds of sugar each year, which translates to about a half a pound or 30 to 60 teaspoons of sugar each day. And you're probably thinking that can't be right. That's a lot of sugar. but that figure is correct. 150 to 170 pounds a year indeed. Now, I know it's hard to believe that you're capable of that, but keep in mind, you're not just consuming sugar in your coffee, but in baked goods. It's hidden in the majority of foods you probably eat regularly, and condiments and stuff like that. So, where is sugar actually hiding? Sugar is added to a lot of things, even in your seasonings, your ketchup, your barbecue sauces, your tomato sauces, your marinade, your dressings, your yogurts, bread, protein bars, peanut butter, soups, canned fruits, the fruit cups, cereals, and frozen dinners. And the list goes on and on and on and on and on and on. And I haven't even included the obvious culprits of soda, cookies, ice cream, Little Debbie cake, stuff like that. Those are the obvious ones. But there are more surprising sugar sneaks in our diet. So some of the reasoning why most people are eating a lot of sugar, some of them not eating it deliberately. I know there are a lot of people who try to make a conscious effort of not eating the obvious culprits like the cookies and the ice cream and the soda, and they still find that I'm still gaining weight. And that was me. I was eliminating everything. I eliminated grains. I eliminated dairy. And I couldn't figure out, okay, why am I not losing weight? What is going on? And it's because there are still sugars that go by alternative names that I didn't know was considered sugar. So we obviously know that aspartame, the obvious culprits, aspartame, sucralose, high fructose corn syrup, we know those are to be the obvious ones. But here are a few more: sorbitol, galactose. I know some of you've probably seen evaporated cane juice and you don't even know what that is. Surigum syrup, agave nectar, and you see agave, oh, this must be good, but it's not. It's still sugar. It's just under an alias, under a different name. Dextrose, maltose, glucose, corn syrup, all of these hidden names for the makers to not be so obvious as putting in the ingredients list sugar, because most people would probably put that down. Oh, it's sugar and I'm going to put it down. But if you say sorghum syrup, you're like, I don't know what that is. I'm picking it up anyway. As long as it doesn't say sugar, aspartame, or sucralose, I'm going to go ahead and get it. But here you are. And I'll provide later on a host of aliases that sugar is known to go by and hide in your foods. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of the reasons why we aren't losing weight and having, a lot of problems. So when I say we're having a lot of problems, that is the big deal. Aside from weight, that's the obvious one. Aside from weight, there are a lot of other issues that people are struggling with that is coming from sugar. But before I go into that, I want to go back to just a few tips to identify or looking for words when you're looking at your nutrition labels. Look for words with the OS and IDES at the end of it, and examine the entire ingredient list, as often there is more than one type of sugar in a product. So those sugars that I've named before, they probably more likely come in pairs. So be careful of that. So if sugar is already on in the food we eat, then why should we care? It's not like everyone is sick, right? But the problem with excessive sugar consumption is that most health issues do not manifest immediately. And if they do, they're not usually recognized as being caused by our diets. So, for example, mental illness and behavioral problems are often attributed to other sources beyond your diet. Allergies, arthritis, migraines, your stress level, your response to medication, immune disorders, degenerative diseases, diabetes, and cancer usually take time to diagnose, and most people aren't grabbing their food journals at this point to search for a connection. But it always more likely connects to, at the end of it, as research has suggested, goes back to sugar. So, I guess to best understand how sugar is so dangerous, you want to know what it's actually made of. So sugar is made of glucose and fructose. And that's two simple sugars, glucose and fructose. Glucose is an important energy source, and it's easy to obtain. If we're not consuming in our diets, our bodies usually produce that on its own. So that's pretty simple. However, fructose is a little different. Our bodies do not produce much of it, and to be honest, we don't really need it for it to function properly, and there's no proven physiological need for fructose at all. So your body does perform off glucose, but there's no necessary need for fructose. So that's just kind of like the basic one-on-one, and I could go into insulin and all that other stuff, but that's just the gist of learning the role of glucose and fructose. So if your body's producing glucose, you don't need that extra fructose, because the liver produces maybe 200 grams of glucose. And the brain, which we need, the brain doesn't eat sugar, glucose. The brain only uses half of that. So that means the other half is doing other use for energy. So you don't need a full 200 grams for energy, but your body produces it anyway. So when you're adding fructose on top of it from other foods and stuff like that, this is when you increase your chances of weight gain. So sugar's role in gaining weight is much more serious than just adding some empty calories. Instead, it affects the hormones responsible for satiety and feeling and satisfying your hunger. Therefore, it leads you to eat more and more and more and more. So, knowing that alone with sugar and weight gain, there is a 60% increased risk of obesity in children for every daily serving of sugar-sweetened beverages in their diet. And it is important to note that the weight gain from sugar is often present in the obvious. It always goes to the abdominal area and through visceral fat. Therefore, sugar is a leading factor in the rise of obesity among other serious health complications. So going back to fructose, one of the main components of sugars is metabolized by the liver, but only in significant amounts at a time. So, luckily, the liver can repair itself, but with continuous sugar consumption, it's hard for it to kind of take a break. So if we're always having it to regenerate and regenerate and regenerate, you're overtaxing your liver. So we're moving on from weight and calories to the other effects of sugar, which is cardiovascular disease. So I want to clear this misconception up that saturated fat is the cause of cardiovascular disease. It is not. It is actually sugar. Okay? There have been many misconceptions on what causes cardiovascular disease, the role of cholesterol, and what foods help or harm the heart. But again, saturated fat is not the culprit. Sugar is. Sugar consumption is the leading contributor to the #1 killer in the world, and we know that is heart disease. Studies have shown that consuming large amount of fructose can cause a rise in bad LDLs and blood glucose, insulin levels, and abdominal obesity. And these findings were reported in about approximately 10 weeks. So, when you're consuming this sugar, did you know that the most alarming part about consuming sugar is that it stays within your system for up to 5 hours. 5 hours. And it is hard to believe that, but that's how we end up with so many problems, because we still have this sugar in us, and then we're still consuming more sugar on top of that, and more sugar on top of that, and more sugar. So it's hard to believe that it's also related to cancer. And how is sugar related to cancer, you ask? Insulin. Insulin is one of the main hormones responsible for regulating the growth of these cells. It has been concluded that having consistently elevated insulin levels can lead or contribute to cancer. So not just diabetes, but cancer. So that's one of the misconceptions that people don't seem to understand, is that sugar causes all diseases, not just diabetes, not just cancer, heart disease as well. So you have to think about all these things when you shop and begin to purchase items that contain sugar. You need to know that there are a lot of health risks involved. So, in addition, sugar also affects our brain significantly. Studies have shown that sugar slows down the brain function, hinders new learning, decreases memory recall, and there is also a strong connection between high sugar intake and the prevalence of depression and anxiety. So we've learned as nutritionists that sugar has a direct correlation, and even the foods you eat, correlation on depression and anxiety. So foods rich in sugar disrupt our brain's neurotransmitters that work to stabilize our moods. However, if we are continuously disrupting the function of these receptors, we no longer have an inherent control over our moods as we usually do, i.e. depression and anxiety. And this is according to Dr. Karazan, a functional medicine expert and author, and a huge contributor to the depression community and chronic depression. So when you think of a sugar crash, how do you feel? What do you think? You just feel like you're tired, or it's just that time of day, you've worked too hard? What do you think? So I want you to, in your time, click on this link here, and watch this awesome video, and it'll explain it a lot better than I can articulate it, but it's a great video, very animated and attention-grabbing, and it shows how sugar affects your brain to learn more, and your mood, and how actually sugar disrupts the brain and leads to addiction. So go ahead and click that link and yeah, let me know your thoughts. Let me know your thoughts on that. So when I say sugar addiction, what does it really mean to be addicted? And can a person really be addicted to sugar? And it does sound really silly that a person can be addicted to sugar, but this is the technical term for it, and according to the American Society of Addiction and Medicine, addiction is a primary chronic disease of the brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. Dysfunction in these circuits leads to characteristic biological, physiological, social, and spiritual manifestations. This is reflected in an individual pathologically pursuing reward and or relief of substance use and behaviors. So it's basically a chronic disease of brain reward. So I guess to sum it up, I guess it's characterized by an inability to consistently abstain, impairment in behavior control, craving, diminished recognition of significant problems with one's behaviors and interpersonal relationships. So it's kind of a relapse, involves cycles and relapse and remission. Without treatment or engagement in recovery activities, addiction is progressive and can result in disability or premature death. So yes, long story. I know that was a pretty long definition, but long story short, it's most important to really understand what we're talking about when we say sugar is addiction. So long story short, yes, you can be addicted to sugar. If it has an effect and there's a cause, there's an addiction. So with all this information, knowing all this, and I know you're like, okay, what do I do? What sugars, like I said in the beginning, what sugars you should avoid would be obviously aspartame. And this is a chemical sweetener. It's best known for appearance in diet sodas. We know that. Sucralose. This is commonly known as brand names such as Splenda. It's processed using chlorine. So researchers are also finding that the waste of consuming this particular sugar, Splenda, can be broken down in wastewater treatment centers. So imagine what that means for inside our bodies. So, needless to say, please avoid sucralose. High fructose corn syrup is this is one that's really hard to avoid, as it's in just about everything. But it plays a huge role in fat buildup in the liver, leptin resistance, and major weight gain. So it's in everything, but you have to avoid it. A study even found that high fructose corn syrup is sometimes laced with mercury. And we know mercury is a heavy metal linked to heart disease and development disorders like autism. And that's how and why people correlate autism back to sugar. And this is the reason why. It's not just, oh, it's just sugar making you this. It's what's put into the sugar. I've just said mercury, chlorine, things that can be broken down into wastewater treatment facilities. So that's what we mean when we say sugar is not good, sugar is bad, is because all the things that are dumped into sugar. And we don't know. We're not scientists. We don't take our food home, deconstruct it, break it down into pieces and put it under a microscope and says, oh, that's chlorine, I'm not going to eat it. We, as consumers, just have to avoid it altogether. So here are some safe sugar alternatives. Stevia. Coconut sugar is a natural sweetener, unrefined. It is a little higher on the glycemic index, meaning it has a little, you can raise your insulin levels just a little bit. However, it still contains all of its vitamins and necessary minerals, so it does not contribute to strong fluctuation in blood sugar like refined added sugar. So it has that unrefined component to it. Raw honey, such as marula honey, provides other health benefits, promoting heart health and fighting inflammation. And monk fruit sweeteners is another natural sweetener. So I know this is a lot of information jam-packed in a few minutes, but as always, too much of a good thing can be bad, so please keep in mind that these alternatives do still break down to glucose and fructose in your body, and all sweeteners should be used infrequently. So even though these are, with the exception, I would say, with stevia, stevia has, it's a natural plant base, and it doesn't raise your insulin. It actually does the opposite effect. It helps you lose weight. So with the exception of that, everything else just, if anything, consume in moderation, particularly, like I said, with the coconut sugar. So again, I know this is a ton of information, and it may be just a little overwhelming at one time. You're welcome to continuously, and which is why I recorded it, to go over this PowerPoint, listen to, take notes, refer back to the Change quote by Charles Darwin, and remember, changing your eating habits and taking control of your health requires a lot of effort, but it is incredibly rewarding. You will experience high quality of life, maintain a healthy weight, and have more natural energy, and avoid serious illnesses. So it's a lot of value in kicking sugar to the curb to become the healthiest version of yourself. So that's what I encourage people to start with, eliminating sugar out of your diet, because we know that is the culprit of a lot of diseases, as I've just explained here. So if you feel like you need additional support and understanding, please feel free to reach out to me. My name again is Esther Rachel, and I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to information about sugar, and I love sharing this topic with people who are eager to transform their health, and this group in particular is just fantastic. So if you have any questions, any further questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll see you in the next presentation. Bye-bye.